Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. I'm Justice, and if you've been following my videos for like the last... didn't catch that. If you've been following my videos for like the last month, give or take, you'd know that I've been covering the entire Carrie franchise, all the way from the book, to the movies, all the way to the musical. And today, I'm just going to compile all those videos together for a little bit of an easier viewing experience if you ever want to go back and check them out, I suppose. And I will have timestamps right down below for each entry of this franchise. And then at the end, I'm going to be doing a ranking of all the films and the book and the musical. It's going to be a very, very long video today, so let's just do a little bit of a flashback to these earlier videos. We're starting off with the 1974 Brian De Palma film, Carrie, and I'm going to be comparing it to its novel counterpart, Carrie by Stephen King, which came out 2 years earlier in 1974. You're going to hear me saying this throughout this series of videos that's going to be coming out over the course of the next few weeks, give or take, that this is my all-time favorite Stephen King adaptation altogether. This is my all-time favorite Stephen King story. I just have such a fondness for Carrie and all the characters in it. It all started back in middle school, actually. Like, I'd seen Stephen King movies before I had seen Carrie, but I'd never read one of his novels before. And in middle school, I picked up this novel after seeing the trailer for the Chloe Grace Moretz remake that was about to come out. And I figured, hey, let's read this novel and we'll go see that movie. And I absolutely fell in love with the book. So anything to do with this story, I am just immediately hooked on. And this is one of those very rare instances too, and I don't know if this is a hot take or not, where I think the film actually does a better job of handling the story versus the actual novel, and I will get into that in this video. But I think I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here. Today we are focusing in on the 1976 film, and this film, like many of the other entries in this franchise, follows Carrie White, who is this bullied outcast in her school, who is constantly taunted and picked on by her classmates, and then she goes home only to be further abused by her overly religious mother. Things in Carrie's life seem like they're about to turn around when she is finally invited to her senior prom, and it seems like she finally has a chance to be able to fit in and be like all of the other kids. At the same time, she discovers her telekinetic powers, and after one last cruel prank, those powers explode in one of the most iconic and tragic finales in horror history. I don't even need to tell you what scene I'm talking about, because anyone who has heard of Carrie without even seeing the movie knows the bucket of blood that gets dropped on her. And over the coming weeks, I'm going to be delving into every single entry into this franchise, from the musical to the multiple remakes, and finally the strange sequel that we got. And one thing that I want to very much stress is that none of those would have ever happened if it wasn't for this Brian De Palma film. In fact, many of the stuff that we see in the remakes of this franchise, even the ones that try to steer more close to the novel, still find themselves adapting things from the Brian De Palma take of this story, because Brian De Palma did a really, really good job of fleshing out the characters more and making everything just feel so much more memorable and truly build this into more of a cohesive world. So today I'm going to be breaking down the biggest differences between the book and the novel, and I'm going to be discussing how that affects like the characters and the overall story, and just how different these characters are versus what they were in the original written text by Stephen King. I also am going to throw in some behind the scenes facts that I learned from a couple documentaries that I found on YouTube. But if you want to see the whole thing, they will be right down in the description below. So I would recommend those if you're interested in this franchise. I thought there was a lot of really interesting stuff in there, and I'm not going to be able to include every little behind the scenes fact that I see. I wish I could, but I'm not making a 2-hour long video on top of what I'm already planning on doing. And I think it very much goes without saying that there are going to be spoilers ahead, but I really don't think I need to warn you guys of that, because I think all of us know what happens when you take Carrie White to prom. Carrie was made on a fairly modest budget, and one thing they did to even cut the budget further was by having an open casting call for Carrie alongside another film, a very little known film called Star Wars, where George Lucas was also looking for people being casted. And that was something that kind of cracked me up in the interview, is all these actors that were in Carrie talking about how they went in to be Princess Leia, or they went in to go be Han Solo, but they got a role in Carrie. That overlap alone, I think, is extremely under talked about and gives it that much more of like an interesting film history behind it. And on top of it too, this movie could have looked way different at one point. Apparently Sissy Spacek wasn't even the first choice for this role. They were considering on having someone else play the titular Carrie in this film. And I am so glad we don't live in that parallel timeline where that happened, because the dedication that Sissy had going into this audition is completely unmatched. She like went in with like dirt on her face and like Vaseline in her hair, she was saying, and was just completely disheveled because she wanted to completely look the part. And even seeing it on screen, I really don't need to be the one to tell you guys that she completely dominated the role, and it's why this character is so well remembered even to this day. But the film opens on the infamous shower scene where you see all the teenage girls after their gym class going into the locker room and cleaning up. You have each one of the girls chit-chatting and talking while they're in different levels of being undressed, and you have this very, very melodic kind of music playing over the whole scene. And I just have never really been a big fan of this whole sequence, the way that it's filmed. It's always felt just a little bit icky to me. Like, I don't know if you guys get what I mean by that. This is like one of the very few critiques I have of this movie as well, is that whole opening sequence just always makes me feel like kind of uncomfortable. I've never really been able to put my finger on it until I watched that documentary. Apparently a lot of the girls were really uncomfortable filming this nude scene in the movie and even ended up crying. And then the ones that you do see nude, Brian De Palma in the documentary called them troopers or something, and like, I don't know, it was just a really weird choice of words, and it kind of made me feel like I had every right to feel that discomfort I did the first time I watched it, because like, I don't know, man, like that's a little bit icky on your part if all your actors are crying before they have to do this nude scene. Like I don't know what else I can say about that, but fortunately, this is the only scene that made me uncomfortable like that. And as this scene does play out, eventually Carrie ends up having her first period and starts to panic because she doesn't know what it is, and she is convinced that she is dying. And all the other girls see this, and as we all know, they all start to throw tampons at her and start screaming at her to plug it up. After all this ensues, Miss Collins, the gym teacher, storms into the locker room and breaks up all the girls and immediately goes and starts to comfort Carrie. And as she's doing this, a light bulb explodes above them, hinting at Carrie's first signs of power in the film. In the novel, Miss Collins is actually Miss Desjardins, and her character is a lot different and has a different kind of story arc in the book versus she does in the movie. In the book though, she has a lot smaller of a presence. You see her in this locker room sequence, you see her in the principal's office initially with Carrie after the scene, just like you would in the film, and then you do see her at the prom at the end, but all the other scenes that you see with her really aren't in the book. They make it way more clear that she goes in to check on Carrie multiple times throughout the movie, up to the point where you see her in the locker room again later in the film when she's trying to give Carrie a pep talk about her looks and telling her how she could dress up and be pretty for prom. That's a scene that wasn't in the book. Or even the scene of her confronting both Tommy and Sue for what their true intentions are for Carrie and having Tommy take her to the prom. That was yet another thing that wasn't actually included in the novel, and I do think it makes her character way more fleshed out and way more interesting to this story that De Palma is trying to tell. It's his take on the character that makes the gym teacher always one of my favorite in this entire franchise, because each iteration of this character in the films tries to emulate Mrs. Collins. Another great addition to the film is when all the girls are confronted that they are going to be going to detention. In the novel, Chris says she's not going to go and then eventually just skips detention, whereas in this version, you get the whole detention sequence. And I'm like so glad they included that detention scene because it is so fun. You have this like really dorky music playing over the whole thing. For some reason, Miss Collins continuously calls out Norma during the whole thing.
5, 2, energy, Norma, come on, stretch, Norma, stretch.
And then when Chris storms off, her mean girl bitchiness is so iconic. The cherry on top is she's shut the fuck up by Miss Collins backhanding her, which behind the scenes trivia, apparently they filmed that take like 30 times and they actually slapped her. I don't think they needed to go that far to get the point across, but it's still a fun scene. I don't think they needed to beat up the actress for it though. This is also where we get clearer portraits of both Chris and Sue. Chris is this like ringleader for the cruelty that's being placed onto Carrie. She's very manipulative and itching for revenge, especially once she's booted from being able to go to the prom. Whereas you have Sue Snell, on the other hand, who feels genuinely guilty over what happened in the locker room. And her attempt at redemption is convincing her boyfriend Tommy to take Carrie to prom, which is handled with more depth in this movie than the book. In the novel, when Tommy goes to ask Carrie to the prom, he corners her in the library and awkwardly pressures her into saying yes after a little while, and it's left at that, whereas there's a little bit more build-up in the film. They include this extra scene where you have Tommy reading poetry in class and Carrie is swooning over his poem. In the novel, it's talked about that Tommy was a poet, but this is a scene that actually isn't in the book, but it was a fun way to include something from the actual source material and also further some more of Carrie and Tommy's dynamic. But in the scene, eventually, when Tommy does confront Carrie to go to the prom in the movie, he asks her and she initially says no and ends up running away. And that's when we get to that sequence I mentioned earlier with Miss Collins trying to pep talk her about how pretty she could look going to the prom. And then later on, Tommy finds Carrie at her house and is able to finally convince her to go there. I think the build up towards it is a lot better than what we got in the book. In the book, it kind of felt a little too fast paced for me. And I think this builds up the kind of would she, won't she type thing with it. Of course she says yes, and we've got to build towards that tragic ending. Then of course, I have to mention Piper Laurie's portrayal of Margaret White in this film, and I really don't think there's much I can say, because just like Sissy Spacek, their Oscar nominations they got for this movie speak for themselves, and she does a fantastic job playing this overly religious mother. In fact, one thing that I think is really enjoyable about her portrayal of the character is her performance is extremely over the top and theatrical. I think many other actors that would try to do what she did with this character would feel extremely out of place in this movie, but she delivers it with so much conviction and realness, and it just comes across so raw that it works here when she's like bursting onto the screen larger than life. She's wearing different outfits, everything she's doing, whether it be movements or the way she's talking, is extremely animated. And she is just one of the most bitter portrayals of this character, because the other versions of Margaret White are, yes, extremely messed up, but this one is more forefront and in your face with it. To backtrack a little bit though, Chris's rage at missing the prom leads her to hatch the infamous pig's blood plan with her boyfriend Billy, who's actually played by John Travolta in one of his very first roles. A huge difference between this though and the book is Billy is actually much more dominant and terrifying in the novel. Chris comes up with the idea, but Billy pushes it forward, and he even contemplates dumping the blood on anyone towards the end of the novel, whether it be Carrie, Chris, or whoever the hell ends up being underneath the bucket. He doesn't care. Their relationship in the novel is disturbingly abusive. The movie downplays some of that, but still keeps enough menace to make them feel dangerous and for you to see the mistreatment that Chris gets from Billy. The film also makes Chris way more of an active villain in the story. You have her going with Billy to go get the pig's blood. You also have her helping him tie the bucket in the rafter so that they can eventually dump it, whereas in the novel, all of this really was left for Billy to figure out on his own. Now, of course, all of this is building to the infamous prom scene, and every time I rewatch this film, every time I read the book, I always wish that it would end at the moment that Carrie was crowned prom queen, because if that was the case, this would be such an uplifting film. You would be so happy for her because she's finally having her sense of belonging. But alas, there's still like another half hour left of the film after she's crowned, so we all know that's not the true ending that we got. The film changes a lot about how this whole scene is staged. Just for example, in the novel, Chris kind of just leaves it up to fate about whether or not Carrie is going to actually be crowned prom queen, versus in the movie, we have her going to her friend Norma and switching out the prom ballots so that Carrie and Tommy can win by a landslide, which I think makes way more sense to the logistics, because what were they gonna do if like Carrie didn't win? I mean, were they just going to dump it on the random Joes that walked up there? I mean, Billy was down for that, but was that really Chris's plan? But the entire ballot switching sequence is filmed as one long continuous shot, following Snoo sneaking in from the backstage, Norma swapping the votes, and the camera drifting up to the bucket above Carrie and Tommy, even passing the teachers as they're counting all of the ballots. It's one of the most beautifully choreographed shots in horror history, but it nearly cost De Palma his job because it ate up a full day of filming. Completely worth it though, because that is the single best shot in this entire movie, and that's not an insult, it's just a really, really good sequence. Jumping back forward though to the big moment when Carrie is on stage, she's getting crowned, and she seems happier than ever. And as I mentioned too, in that tracking shot, you have Sue in the background watching and just happy to see that Carrie's finally having her moment to shine when she sees this bucket of blood hanging from the rafters, and then sees both Chris and Billy hiding underneath the stairs. She rushes at the two of them to stop what they're about to do, only for Miss Collins to misinterpret what her intentions are, and she stops her and throws her out of the gymnasium before all hell breaks loose. This entire sequence actually isn't even in the book yet again. This is something else they added in. In the actual book, Sue is at home this entire time. She's not actually here. Like I keep saying, many of the scenes that were in the book that just add other characters into a scene that weren't originally there, I think it just fleshes the scene out way more and makes it way more interesting. But by the time Sue's tossed outside, Chris pulls the rope and the bucket tips and the blood drenches Carrie, and the bucket itself falls and kills Tommy. A detail here is that actress Nancy Allen, who plays Chris, described pulling that rope as if it were like an orgasm. And watching the scene, you can absolutely see that sadistic glee. It adds another layer of cruelty to the character. In the book, it's made painfully clear as well that after the blood spills, that everybody in the gym starts to laugh at Carrie White, not because the scene is funny, but because they're so horrified and they don't know how else to react to it. Even with another line being thrown in there along the lines of nobody would cry for Carrie White. In the movie though, it's played up as it's Carrie's delusion seeing everybody laughing at her, as you have this like honeycomb type lens on the screen as it pans across everybody laughing at her. It seems like in that moment, she's finally snapped. And it's made more than apparent that she can't separate reality from paranoia anymore just because of how much she has been taunted and picked on and been the butt of every single joke her entire life. In these moments though, if you're reading the book, Carrie ends up fleeing the stage and going outside and having a breather for a couple minutes. And while she's out there, she eventually goes back up to the gymnasium doors and latches them all shut without actually going inside, and then starts to enact her revenge with her telekinesis. And as she's looking through the glass, she has this very sinister smile. It's very calculated, like she knows what she's doing in those moments. Whereas in the film, they completely cut her going outside. In fact, you never see that sequence in any of the entries in this franchise. Her rage comes out in full swing right on that stage shortly after Tommy dies, and I think that's a way better choice than having that little bit of break with her running outside. I think in the book format it works, But in a movie, I think that would just drag the scene on, like give us what we came here for and move the story along so that nobody's falling off of it. All the effects in this scene too have aged extremely well. You have sprinklers raining down, loose wires electrocuting students and staff. You even have this fire hose that whips around the room, which infamously injured actress PJ Soles, who played Norma, for real when it ruptured her eardrum, with her even saying that a shot of that still ended up in the film. One of the most devastating changes that they make in this film, though, is the death of Mrs. Collins. Like I said, she can no longer tell who is friend or foe. She sees Mrs. Collins and thinks she's laughing at her. And while in the novel, yes, she did, in this iteration with the way her character's written, I really don't think that's actually what happened. But as Carrie is killing everyone, she actually crushes Mrs. Collins to death. Whereas in the novel, her character actually survives the prom night massacre. And we have her after the event sending in her resignation letter, with her being haunted with guilt for not doing more. And I really think that King in the novel was getting at that the adults that weren't actually doing anything were just as guilty as all these kids that were mistreating Carrie, because silence is just as bad as someone enacting hate on someone else. In King's novel, Carrie leaves the gym and unleashes her powers on the entire town of Chamberlain, burning and destroying everything in her path. De Palma's film, though, keeps things smaller. Instead of showing a large-scale destruction, Carrie kills Chris and Billy on her way home, which also was a scene originally that happened after her going to her mom's house in the book, which I do enjoy Chris and Billy's death in this film. But out of all of the entries, this might be a hot take, and I'm not going to spoil, I guess, which one it is, which you guys could probably guess which one it is that I think Chris and Billy have the best death in, but I'll leave that for later. But I think this death is really fun when you see their car flip. I think the practical effects for it have aged extremely well. I'm not going to be saying that so much about the next movie I talk about where we see their deaths, but here it looks really damn cool. Carrie ends up making it home though, and she cleans all the blood off herself before finally finding her mother, who begins to recite all these religious scriptures at her and telling her all these messed up stories about Carrie's inception and how she thought that Carrie was a cancer and how she even contemplated murdering her own daughter multiple times. And the whole reason for that is because this scene was actually never rehearsed. In fact, Piper Laurie fought to keep this scene in the film, and good on her, because this whole scene is extremely unnerving and adds so many layers to Margaret's psyche that the rest of the film hadn't, and I love how it plays out. But after this, Carrie gets down with her mother to pray, and she thinks she's finally getting some of the love and support from her mother that she's been desperately craving her entire life, until Margaret eventually stabs her. This eventually leads to a little bit of a scuffle between the two of them before Carrie hoists her mother up into the air, before impaling her with all these different sharp objects around the house that looks like a horrifying parody of Jesus Christ's crucifixion. And as Margaret is getting impaled, she's letting out all these noises that sound painfully much like an orgasm. In fact, when I showed this film to my boyfriend, he started laughing because he thought it sounded like she was having an orgasm in the middle of the scene as she was dying. And as I was watching behind the scenes documentary, apparently Piper Laurie played it that way on purpose, and I actually love her reason behind it, because she was talking about how originally in the script it was meant to be played as your typical death scene with typical death noises. But because of how messed up this character is and how much of a Bible thumper she is, death is nothing but a sweet release for her in this moment. And she craves it so she can go on to the next life, essentially. And I love that take on it. I think that is way more fun and way more memorable. This death is a huge departure though from what happens to Margaret in the book. When Carrie gets home, it's very calculated. They both plan on killing each other. There isn't any moment where Margaret tricks Carrie into thinking that she is going to be there for her. It very much is this scene where it's like, hey mother, I'm here to kill you, and Margaret being like, hey daughter, well, I'm going to kill you. You don't have that aspect here. And then when Carrie does eventually kill her mother, she doesn't kill her in this crucifixion scene. She uses her mind to wrap her hand around Margaret's heart, which ends up stopping it. It's a cool death in the story and I liked it, but I do think the imagery we're given by Brian De Palma with this crucifixion is far superior, and I think it ties into the character way more, and the bastardization of her own religion against her and her being used for that is just the cherry on top for the whole scene. Like, I don't know how else I can say that. The fact that Carrie essentially throws her religion in her face and her fear-mongering at the end. But after killing her mother, Carrie is completely broken. She pulls Margaret's body from the wall and cradles her mother while sobbing and drags her into her closet. By now, her powers have completely spiraled out of control, crushing the house in on itself, while both the mother and daughter are buried together, the story ending in a true Shakespearean type tragedy. The house crumbling in on itself too has aged extremely well yet again, and I think it's all the much better with the fact that they just lit the house on fire and just sped it up in post-production. Originally, they planned on having this mechanism drop all these rocks on the house to crush it, but it broke, so they were like, yo, light a match and we'll just set the thing ablaze and film that. And I think that worked perfectly. I don't think you can tell that that was very much them writing by their coattails, trying to figure something else out. I think it plays into the movie just so superbly and is one of the most iconic scenes in this film, obviously below the bucket of blood though. The film closes though with one last jump scare where you have Sue Snell, the sole survivor, who returns to the site of Carrie's house, now just a smoking crater. She kneels to lay flowers, and suddenly Carrie's bloody hand shoots up from the rubble to grab her. Sue wakes up screaming it was just a dream, and her mother is trying to console her as the movie fades to black. This scene has not aged gracefully at all, in my humble opinion, but you also can't deny how revolutionary this jump scare was back in the day, because even the first Friday the 13th movie, the creators of it have openly admitted that they ripped off the ending of Carrie, where in that film they have Jason jumping out of the river and pulling the girl down, and her waking up and realizing like, oh, it was all just a dream. Like, this ending was super revolutionary because the whole scene was shot in this very dreamlike way. They actually had the actress who played Sue Snell walk backwards the whole sequence, and then they just reversed the footage, so everything looks like it's kind of like off the way it's moving. You even see cars moving in the opposite direction behind her. I think that's all really cool choices. I just think the music cue and the eventual jump scare is kind of laughable in today's day and age. But again, I think all of us are just kind of desensitized to jump scares at this point, so I can't really blame this movie for that. But the scene still is a fun one and doesn't knock anything off of it for me. It just doesn't really have the scare factor that it used to anymore, and that's okay. For me, this movie has clearly stood the test of time. It is not only just one of my favorite Stephen King adaptations, this is one of my all-time favorite horror franchises, and it does hold a very near and dear place in my heart. A huge part of that too, I think, is just that I find Carrie's character to be so relatable. As a gay man, I really don't think it's that much of a stretch to be able to see a queer subtext in this story. You have Carrie, this outsider, who is stuck with this overly religious parent, while everyone at school looks at her like she's different, while she's blossoming with her telekinetic powers as she hits puberty. I think a lot of that can be pushed towards the gay experience when you're discovering your own sexuality, when you hit puberty and realizing that you're different from everyone else and not really understanding what exactly that means, and then the mistreatment that society will give you at times. I really don't think it's that much of a stretch to draw a comparison between those two things. And for me, I think that's a huge part of the reason why teenage me was able to relate to this character and love this story so much. Because I think on some kind of like subconscious level, Little Justice was able to see himself in Carrie White to some extent. But I don't want to get too much into detail about that. I've thought about when I'm done covering this franchise, possibly doing a video essay to better explain my thoughts on that. So if that's something you guys would be interested in seeing, you should let me know that down in the comments below. But anyways, that's the 1976 Carrie film. I do completely stand by that the film is way better than the novel, as rare as that might be. But you guys should let me know what you think. Do you prefer the Brian De Palma film? Do you prefer the Stephen King novel? I would love to hear what you guys think. And if you guys just have anything else you want to talk about with this movie, stuff I might have missed, or other fun facts, you should drop those down in the comments down below too. I would love to hear them. We're jumping back into the Carrie franchise with 2002's Carrie, the made-for-TV movie. And funnily enough, this was actually the very first Carrie adaptation I ever saw back in middle school. And boy, what a weird way to start this franchise. Like I said in the last video, which if you haven't seen that, it's linked down below. I had just finished reading the novel because the Chloe Grace Moretz remake was about to come out, and since I couldn't convince my parents to take me to see it in theaters, I scoured YouTube and I found this version uploaded for free. And yeah, 13-year-old me thought it was awesome at the time, and looking back now as an adult, this movie is a hot mess. Now, it's not the worst thing I've ever seen. There are moments and performances that I think work, but overall, it's exactly what you'd expect from an early 2000s made-for-TV movie. It has really flat cinematography. In fact, this entire movie looks extremely gray and like it's afraid of color. It's the weirdest damn choice. The budget is painfully low, and we are going to get fully into that when we start talking about all the weird CGI that's constantly thrown at the camera in this movie. And also the actors in this movie, I wouldn't even say they're B-list actors, they're more like C or D-list actors, and they give some of like the most stiff performances I've seen in a while, and I don't even know if that's really their fault. The dialogue choices in this movie sometimes, man, are really bad, and if this wasn't made in the early 2000s, I would be questioning whether or not this movie was written using AI. But for anyone who hasn't seen this version, the 2002 Carrie follows the same basic beats of the 76 film and the novel. A shy, outcast girl named Carrie discovers she has telekinetic powers and suffers from relentless bullying, and finally snaps on prom night after a cruel prank. The film tells this familiar story through a mix of flashbacks and police interviews, which is where it tries to set itself apart from the other adaptations. This film isn't going to be a plot breakdown, and if you'd like something similar to that, I'd recommend the last video I did again, because I discussed the things De Palma changed up from the book for the movie, and this film essentially abandons most of those things that De Palma changed to stick with what was originally in the novel. Whether that worked is up for debate. But in this iteration, Carrie herself is played by Angela Bettis, who I love typically, and she's a massively underrated actress. She's fantastic in May, which is one of my favorite early 2000s horror B movies. If you haven't seen that one, I highly recommend it. The character in that film is incredibly similar to Carrie, and if you've seen May, you know that Angela Bettis has the acting chops to be able to play Carrie. Even in that film, she's able to pull off that weird outsider girl who is mistreated by her peers and other people around her before she eventually snaps. In fact, it's kind of a Carrie tale, just without the religious mother and the telekinesis. But as much as I love Angela Bettis, there is one glaring problem. She is too old for this role. Bettis was 29 at the time, and unlike Sissy Spacek, who was 26, unfortunately, Bettis does look like a grown woman. It's really hard to be able to suspend your disbelief that these are teenagers. In fact, a lot of the cast looks too much like full-grown adults versus teens. With the rest of the cast, it's really hit or miss. Some performances stand out, but for the most part, it feels like a lineup of TV actors who are trying to do their best with some really freaking clunky dialogue. Even Sue Snell in this film, she is played by Candice McClure, and this character is usually amongst my favorites in this franchise, but in this film, she's handled very strangely. Like, I don't hate her here. Some of the added moments between her and Carrie set up this more blossoming friendship, like this lipstick scene where she helps Carrie find her shade, or even Tommy reassuring Carrie that Sue thinks she's cool when he asks her to the prom. Those little touches give their relationship more depth than we typically get in other adaptations. Hell, it gives more depth than we ever actually see in the novel. Where it stumbles for me is less about the performance and more about the writing. Like, I'll just clip in a few random lines and you tell me if this sounds like actual good dialogue or not.
Shouldn't religion be more like dogs playing poker?
Dogs playing
Poker. I can't tell you what any of the apostles are doing in the Last Supper, but I can tell you that the little white bulldog is holding an ace under the table. We had our differences.
Differences about Carrie White.
Differences about a lot of things. I played with Barbie, she played with horses. She's a back to front, I'm a front to back.
Unfortunately, Sue has so many of these moments where she's popping off with this snarky dialogue like this, like she thinks she's doing something, but it's just cringe. It's very cringe writing. Because instead of letting her actions speak for themselves, she's stuck explaining everything in these really awkward interrogation scenes. That said though, I do appreciate that they had the cojones to do colorblind casting back in the 2000s and casted her character as a black woman. Making Sue a black character in a mostly white upper middle class school naturally positions her as a bit of an outsider too, which could have been used to deepen her connection to Carrie, with her being able to have some kind of understanding with Carrie for her fellow outsider status, at least to some degree. But for the most part, this really just sticks to being subtext, and they don't really ever do anything with it, when it's pretty damn clear that there could have been way more done with that without pandering or throwing stuff in your face. I think that it was an actual really interesting change, and I wouldn't mind seeing another adaptation try to do it, because like I said, they really just don't do much with this added layer of subtext to the film. But backtracking to those police interrogations, this adaptation tries to stick more closely to King's novel by incorporating the police interviews as a framing device throughout the entire movie. It's very similar to how the actual novel pieces together police interrogations and documents to show you how the story played out other than just directly telling you. And in theory, I respect the attempt at being closer to the source, but in execution, it's extremely laughable. The opening scene of the film is filled with even more awkward dialogue and is such a painful way to start the movie. And again, just listen to this dialogue and tell me if that's a good choice to start your film on. Mind you, this is minutes into the movie.
He's traditional glazed. Like heroin. Highly addictive. You ever try heroin, Sue?
No.
Good girl. Nasty stuff. Cocaine?
No.
A little X, occasional joint?
Now, after hearing that, try and tell me with a straight face that this doesn't feel like parody rather than the serious tone that they're obviously trying to go for. The film also pads out the story with extra scenes from the novel. One scene that actually isn't shown in either entry is a scene of Carrie as a kid seeing her neighbor topless in her backyard, and Margaret freaking out over Carrie seeing the neighbor girl's dirty pillows before dragging her daughter inside, which unleashes this giant boulder-sized hail to start raining on the house. It's then you're reminded just how low the budget this movie is yet again, because the CGI looks straight out of early Smallville, if you guys remember that show, when you see the meteors raining in the sky in the pilot. After rewatching the Smallville pilot, or at least the clip of that scene of the meteors raining onto the town, I would like to redact my statement that it looks as bad as Smallville. In fact, I would like to say that it looks worse. Way, way, way worse. I honestly think they could have just cut this whole sequence, but again, there are so many other instances of bad CGI in this movie. I don't think just cutting this one scene would have saved us from seeing just how cheaply made this movie really was. After watching the Smallville clips, though, I was reminded of the Smallville theme song, and if you guys remember that theme song, oh boy, it is going to get caught in your head. And if you don't remember, I'm going to bless your ears with it and randomly clip it throughout this video. So be ready for that. And unfortunately, this problem carries through to the prom sequence. Instead of building suspense, they insert an awkward dance montage to fill a runtime after Carrie is crowned prom queen, completely killing the tension before the infamous pig's blood drop. The score in the original film is so iconic as well, with clear inspiration from Psycho. This one sounds like the first royalty-free music they felt could hit the spot. If I didn't know this was a TV movie, I would have also thought that it was shot for 3D with as often as CGI BS flies at the camera. You literally see this whole headboard to a basketball hoop swing into the camera before being thrown at it to land on one of the girls. It is the strangest choice for a TV movie. Another thing the movie does try to do differently, and where I'll give it credit, because I'll give credit where credit is due, they try to stick more faithfully to the novel and show the destruction of the whole town. But again, it may have been a better idea to just have cut it, because the effects take you on a trip straight to Uncanny Valley here. You're just met with scene after scene of Carrie walking in this green screen as she's throwing all this different stuff from her mind that make PlayStation 2 graphics look like they're in HD, and it's just extremely laughable. Even when you get to the scene of her eventually killing Chris and Billy by throwing the car against this tree, it has these like really weird jump cuts, and so much of it is used to be really, really bad CGI. So I just don't understand the choices that were made here at all. It just looks really, really hokey and pulls you out of the whole damn movie. But after seeing these CGI cars and fences getting thrown around, we are finally getting to Carrie's showdown with her mother. We see that Carrie has no memory of the awful things she has just done at her prom when she talks to Margaret, which I think this choice for the character was made with recent tragedies of the time in mind. Apparently, the writers were worried about having too much of a teenage vigilante theme due to the Columbine massacre, and don't quote me on this, but I think it bleeds through here. It's a strange choice to have Carrie have a full-on out-of-body experience where she doesn't remember what she did. I prefer her losing control and then coming down from her rage only to realize what she has done. I think that's far more impactful for the character. But after this, Margaret tries to kill Carrie like she always does in every adaptation, but instead of the crucifixion imagery from De Palma's version, Carrie instead stops Margaret's heart with her telekinesis, just like in the novel. I like that nod to King's book. I think it's cool to be able to see it on screen, but again, it looks like a PlayStation 2 cutscene from Mortal Kombat as we get like this strange, like in-chest close-up of her heart. I like the tension and the acting between both Carrie and her mother during this whole scene. The way it builds up is really good, but the special effects undercut this otherwise like pretty damn good scene, and that's the biggest problem with this entire movie is you get these scenes where like there's good acting and it just completely is lost on you because they make all these really weird creative decisions throughout the film. I mean, I even told you my problem with Sue. I do enjoy Sue's character in this one, but that bad dialogue they give her throughout it is just so freaking questionable. And that's all the characters in this. It's like they didn't really know what they were doing overall with the story. But speaking of Sue, we get to the ending, which might be the strangest departure in the entire franchise. Instead of Carrie dying, Sue barges in and rescues her, slaps a terrible wig on her head, which I swear was a Spirit Halloween recreation of Drew Barrymore's hair from Scream, and the two of them drive off like a knockoff Thelma and Louise into the sunset. The idea was apparently to launch a TV series where Carrie and Sue travel around helping other people with powers so they don't snap like Carrie did. And it was also supposed to follow Carrie overcoming the guilt of all the people she has killed, which this last part can be evidenced by the pathetic attempt at a jump scare at the end of the film, with her having nightmares of both her mother and Chris. With how poorly this movie was received though, both critically and by fans, it's no wonder that spin-off never materialized, and I am perfectly okay with that. At the end of the day, this is the Carrie I feel most negative about in the entire franchise. I respect that it tries to stick closer to Stephen King's original novel, but when even King himself admits De Palma's film improved on his story, I don't think following the book beat for beat in an adaptation was the right call here. And as a teenager, like I said, I was blinded by being able to see this story on screen for the first time, but rewatching it now, this isn't a good movie, you guys, and I very much think I was just 13, and I do think I live by that unless you're a diehard Carrie completionist, I would say just skip this movie and go watch me. That's a great Angela Bettis performance right there. But anyways, what did you guys think of the 2002 Carrie? Did you like it? Hate it? Let me know in the comments below. We're going to be jumping back into the Carrie franchise with 2013's Carrie, the third adaptation of Stephen King's novel, and the last one I'll be covering before moving on to the stranger entries in this franchise. Now, if you guys have seen my reviews on both the 1976 original and the 2002 made-for-TV movie, you probably already know I've hinted a few times at how I feel about this remake, so let's just put it out there and clear the air. I am a proud defender of this movie. I saw that original teaser of the film of Carrie going through the town and destroying the city and was immediately intrigued, and that was my introduction to this franchise, and the story was that teaser. And I'll admit that maybe part of it is me being blinded by nostalgia, because this is the Carrie movie that I saw when I was a kid and the one that built my intrigue for this whole franchise. And yes, in the last video I admitted that the 2002 version was technically the first Carrie film that I ever saw. This one continues to hold a special place in my heart, and yes, like I said, nostalgia may be my bias, but I do genuinely enjoy this movie. That being said though, this is a safe space, and if you're like me and love this remake, you're welcome here, and if you don't like it, totally fair. I see you, and I'll be pointing out plenty of flaws too, because as much as I defend it, this is far from a perfect movie, and the biggest criticism, and honestly the most valid one, is that this isn't really a new adaptation of King's book. Instead, it leans heavily on being a beat-for-beat remake of Brian De Palma's film. Whole scenes are lifted straight from that version, including added material that wasn't even in the novel, like Tommy's poetry scene in class, or Miss Desjardins' extended moments, such as her confronting Tommy and Sue, and her other scene where she gives Carrie that sweet pep talk in the locker room. Those were all De Palma created scenes. Reading the behind the scenes, it's worth noting that Kimberly Pierce, the director of this film, wanted to create a movie that was more original and modernized, and you can even see echoes of that in the teaser. You have all these voices talking over the disaster of the night. It almost seems like they were trying to reference the White Commission, which was amongst the documents and court testimonies from the novel, and from what I can tell after doing some research, they cut out a lot of the violence in this film and did a bunch of reshoots after the tragedy of Sandy Hook to avoid any backlash, and it's rumored that over 40 minutes of deleted scenes exist and just have never been released to the public, some of which would have included the town destruction and more emphasis on the modern technology. And I can't find any hardcore proof that these scenes do exist for a fact, but if they do, it is a shame that there hasn't been any actual release or word of it, because it makes interviews with Kimberly talking about how she wanted to make the film different incredibly laughable, because this is just a modernized take on De Palma's film at the end of the day. But to give credit where it's due, this movie does sprinkle in a few scenes from the novel that De Palma left out, and those moments really help flesh out the characters. You have a scene with Tommy and Sue added where he hypes Sue up to apologize to Carrie. There's a scene with Chris's father going to the school to try and get Chris back into the prom, which is added in, and rather than just having the principal and her father in the scene like in the novel, Miss Desjardins and Chris both appear, and I love the back and forth between all four characters, and it's one of the scenes where Chris really shines as a stone cold bitch, which is something I'll get way more into in this review, because I love this iteration of Chris and Miss Desjardins for that matter.
You're right, Daddy. That's what she said. Shitty. She's really abusive.
And I'd really die on the hill that the casting in this remake is mostly spot on. Every actor feels well suited for their roles, and that's one of the biggest reasons I hold this film in such a special place. This film was actually Ansel Elgort's very first role, and honestly, I think he knocked it out of the park. He feels like such a believable love interest. He's very charismatic and really easy to buy in as Tommy, and I'll admit that I am totally biased here yet again, because The Fault in Our Stars was a massive phenomenon when I was in school. Everybody was reading it. Everybody was crying over his character dying in the film, and it basically left a scar on my entire generation. So yeah, maybe that nostalgia covers how I see him here, but I think he nails the balance of being a jock while also having that heart of gold kind of energy, a little bit of a golden retriever even. So I feel the need that I should probably redact my earlier statement about Ansel Elgort. This is really the only part of the video where I glazed him, and as I was editing, I discovered more about some accusations that were made against him that have to do with SA, and a whole bunch of girls came forward for it. And I'm not a true crime channel. I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty of this, but I'm always going to support and believe the victim. And it sucks because I like this movie, and I like The Fault in Our Stars, as I said, and it paints those movies in a different light. But at the end of the day, he's not the only actor in those films. He's not the main actor of this movie. And I'm not going to damn this entire film when you have plenty of other actors in it who did their damnedest to give a good performance and haven't done anything wrong for this to be written off for them. But anyways, we'll get back to the regularly scheduled program now. Then we've got Chris, who I mentioned a second ago, the queen of bitches and a type A mean girl. And she's played by Portia Doubleday. And I've got to say, her version of Chris is probably the most ruthless take we've seen yet. She feels like one step away from being a full-on sociopath. And Portia sells it completely. The way she carries herself, the look she gives, and her delivery makes it so easy to believe that she's this person, and she just completely embodies Chris. In fact, there's all these moments in the movie where she drops these like snarky teenage angst dialogue where it just shows how entitled she is, and it just cracks me up every time I hear them because she is just so freaking easy to hate.
I fucking hate Carrie White.
Another performance I need to shout out as well is Judy Greer as Miss Desjardins, and this is my favorite version of the character in any of these adaptations. Judy brings such warmth and kindness to the role, and it really does feel like she cares about Carrie more than any other version of the gym teacher, but she also layers in just like the right amount of comedy and humor, and Judy Greer is just a really good comedy actress in the first place, so it works perfectly here. And her performance feels more grounded and compassionate and totally believable.
Are you gonna get him a boot in the air? Or are you just gonna pin a bloody tampon to his lapel?
And of course, I can't talk about Carrie without talking about the two most important characters, Margaret White and Carrie White. The mother-daughter dynamic in this film, compared to the other adaptations, hits in a really powerful way, at least for me. Julianne Moore's performance as Margaret is phenomenal. Her abuse towards Carrie feels far more emotional in a different way than what we got in De Palma's version. Piper Laurie played Margaret as someone who seemed to have no love for Carrie at all, just a woman obsessed with spouting sermons and controlling her daughter through fear. And the closest we see to her affection is in the climax when she hugs Carrie while plotting to kill her, and even then, it doesn't come across as her having any compassion for her daughter, even if it's for messed up reasons. Julianne Moore, on the other hand, brings a very different energy to this role. You genuinely get the sense that she loves Carrie through all the disturbing things she puts her through, and in her twisted ways, she believes she's saving her daughter's soul. She's more emotionally manipulative, and in many ways even scarier, and the moments of self-harm really stand out for her character. Some critics of the film say it's just for shock value, but I think it works as a magnificent way to show how much she guilts Carrie. Margaret hurts herself to manipulate Carrie into thinking that her daughter's quote-unquote sins are the cause of it, and it adds another disturbing layer of how toxic and broken their relationship really is at the end of the day. And then there's Carrie herself, played by Chloe Grace Moretz, and yeah, I'll be honest, I understand the criticisms. She doesn't look like the book version, and she doesn't have that awkward, unsettling presence that Sissy Spacek or even Angela Bettis brought in the previous movies. She's very much a cover girl type, and I know that bothers a lot of people. I have a different take than most people on it, though, because abuse can happen to anyone. You don't have to look weird or awkward to be ostracized or bullied or abused. You just need to be vulnerable enough for a bully to set their sights on you. And on top of that, I think Moretz is a really strong actress. She brings a believable emotional core to this role, and I just think that she gets way too much criticism for the looks department. Like I said, I get she doesn't look like the book version or the film versions, but I do like this little extra thing that like shows you that like you don't need to put like abuse in a box for like who's going to get abused and who's not. All that being said though, I will not defend the marketing because those posters are, yeah, those are a choice. Chloe is styled like she's on the cover of Vogue's Halloween magazine. It's way too glossy and done up and completely the wrong vibe for these movies. But inside the actual film, with the text we're given and the performance that we see, I think she does a really damn good job carrying this movie. No pun intended there. We just won't talk about some of those weird-ass expressions, though, that she makes randomly throughout the film. I think this movie, though, overall, it plays out way more like a tragedy than many of the other entries do. You don't have as much focus on the horror elements as you do in the original one. In the last two adaptations, I feel like as Carrie's discovering her powers, it's set up in this way where it's supposed to like elicit fear from you, versus in this version, you see some fear with Carrie as she's discovering her abilities, but overall, there's also this like mix of wonder with it as she's starting to be able to take control and learn how to use her telekinetic abilities. And this film, I think out of all of them, could easily draw a parallel between Carrie being like an X-Man that was not found and they weren't able to save before they could like hire her on to be one of the X-Men. I think this film plays out way more like a tragedy though because of that, because this first part of the film, yes, there's your horrifying moments with the abuse that Margaret pulls on her. There's of course the infamous period scene of Carrie getting pelted by the tampons. Like those are all things that you're going to see in a Carrie film. But something about this one feels way more uplifting to me and way more lighthearted with the characters and gives you more hope that Carrie is going to make it through to the end and have some kind of happy ending. And the way it flips the script when you get to the eventual prom scene, I think is done really well. And for that prom scene, I really do enjoy how that scene plays out. You have so many of these really cool shots of like moments of seeing each individual character dying. And as it's all going on, it seems like Carrie is in full control and vengeful mode. The first movie, it seemed like she was in a trance, and then you have the 2002 one where she doesn't even remember her lashing out after the fact. In this entry, it seems very calculated and cold, like you pushed this bitch too far and she's going to show you what's up now. I really do like that energy to the character. I think that's a very natural way to change it up, honestly. And I think that a lot of the kills she does in this scene are extremely memorable. Like you have this one guy that gets crushed inside a set of bleachers that she closes in on him. You have this other girl set on fire, which is a really cool fire stunt. And then you even have this other scene where these two girls get trampled by everybody running over them. It's a very gruesome entry. And another thing that I do enjoy as well is Miss Desjardins gets to survive in this entry. Because of the portrayal that they're going for during this prom scene shows Carrie so calculated and cold towards all these people that abused her, it wouldn't make much sense for her to kill the gym teacher in this version. So I do enjoy that she actually gets saved. And then after that, I feel like that's when we get to the closest glimpses of what I talked about a minute ago of like the destruction of the town. It is the closest thing we get to seeing anything like that in a higher budget, and it honestly isn't even much, because as Carrie's leaving the gymnasium, you see all these fires starting to erupt in the streets from this overhead shot. It's a really brief glance of a scene, and then even when you get to the scene of her getting to Chris and Billy, I love the change up to that, and I've mentioned in the other videos too that there is a version of Chris and Billy's death that is my favorite, and this one knocks that slot like out of the park. It is so freaking good the way the entire thing's handled. Because on the town destruction, you see Billy and Chris trying to drive away from the scene of the act. Then Carrie sees them and she like stomps on the ground and all these cracks form and the street just bursts apart in front of Billy and Chris's car. And then when they turn around, they go to run Carrie over and she stops them and it like knocks Billy out. So then Chris takes control of the car and Carrie lifts this car up into the air. And there's questionable CGI in this movie, but nothing that happens here is questionable. Like, I think it all looks really good and has aged really well for this scene in particular, because she has this car lifted in the air and she's essentially toying with Chris as Chris is like revving the engine and like getting the miles up there, but the car's not doing anything. She even like tries to choke Chris with the seatbelt at one point before Chris unclicks it. But then finally, after Chris decides to push on the gas one last time, truly test a bitch and see if she'd go there, Carrie does, in fact, go there and sends the car sailing into this gas station. And we get this Mortal Kombat style, like, fatality scene of Chris's face just smashing through the windshield with some really cool effects and, again, really good use of CGI, because it looks so damn good and it's so freaking memorable. Like, this is the best version of those characters' demise, especially for how wicked they make Chris in this entire movie. When she finally gets her just desserts, it's just chef's kiss right there, man. And when you get to the eventual scene of her mom at home, this is where I will kind of critique the movie a little bit and move more towards that direction, because I don't think everything here is perfect. I really do enjoy that mother-daughter dynamic between the two of them. I think that's a lot of fun, like I said a minute ago. And I think that it's put onto really good effect when she first gets home, because you have Margaret manipulating her, but then you see how she's telling Carrie that she loves her because she's her daughter, and that she didn't kill her when she was a child, even though she thought she was a curse, because she loved her and she couldn't bring herself to do it, and she begged for God to save her little girl for her. That's what I was saying for how I feel like this character seems like she has more compassion for her daughter, and it's not all rooted in hatred. She's still an awful mother and just a total POS, but like you can see that she does have some love for her daughter through like all of her warped and crazy delusions that she has about the world, and just how tightly she is wrapped around religion in this film. You can still see some love for Carrie, other than just this like theatrical sermon like you saw in the original. When she does eventually kill Margaret, though, they redo that scene from the original film, and this is where it kind of loses me a little bit, because in the original film, they used practical effects to do that parody of a crucifixion with Margaret, the bastardization of her religion, and it looked really cool. And the way Piper Laurie played the scene as well, where she treated her death as like a release, and it looked almost orgasmic and pleasureful for her. And that's something I mentioned in my first review as well, that the scene was actually meant to be played as your typical death scene, that it wasn't supposed to be this like blissful experience for Margaret. She was supposed to die how one would die, very painful and gruesomely, with a lot of grunts and screams. And that's what we get in this version, and it does take a lot of the steam out of the sails, especially when you just saw how much Piper Laurie like threw herself into that role in those moments, because that is such a memorable sequence in it, and such a memorable acting choice, because who thinks to do that when you die? That woman is a legend, and I can totally see why she got nominated for the Oscar for that role. Not only is the performance not as memorable in those moments to me, the CGI that they used to pin her up on the wall just proves that a lot of times, like, you don't need CGI to make scenes look better in a movie, and it doesn't age the best either, because I know back in 2013, when I saw this movie, I didn't think it looked that bad. In fact, I actually kind of liked it, but looking at it now, a lot of scenes like that just look really freaking sloppy, and they're not that good. It is aged very poorly, in fact, and you can just tell it's a whole bunch of computer-generated shit on the screen. It doesn't look real at all, and this isn't the only point in the movie where you feel that. There's even a sequence earlier in the film where Carrie's testing her powers in her bedroom, and she has all these books floating in the air, and when I was watching the behind the scenes, they talked about how they tried doing it practical with like fishing hooks or whatever, and they just could not get them to work for them. And I wish they would have figured something else out, because all these years, it's not even that many years later, actually. I don't know why I said all these years, because it just doesn't look that good. It really doesn't. That's my take on it anyways, man. But no, if you guys haven't noticed, to cycle away from Margaret and the bad CGI of it all, I haven't really talked about Sue at all during this, and the main reason for that is because I really don't think Sue's character in this version is all that memorable. I think the actress does a good enough job with the role. Like, I have no problem with her. It's just, there's nothing really new with the character for me to note on, and the one thing I can note on, I feel like it's such a nothing subplot that's like added to this movie, and there isn't much reason for it to be here, and it could have easily been cut. But when you have Sue finally go to the house, you have her finding Carrie right after her mom died, and then you have her trying to convince Carrie to get out of the house as it's crumbling down around them, as it does in the first film as well, and she can't get Carrie to leave, but then Carrie puts her hand out and for some reason has the ability to be able to do like an ultrasound on Sue with her mind, but like Kay, and she's able to tell that Sue is pregnant and even tells her it's a girl. And Sue had no idea she was pregnant, and you get little glimpses of this subplot in the movie. You have one sequence towards the beginning of Sue and Tommy having sex, and then a little bit later on, her having morning sickness. They're literally only a couple scenes, and for some reason it comes back around at the end of the movie, and it almost seems like they were trying to touch upon something that happened in the novel, because you have this fear from Sue in the book that she is pregnant, but then at the end of the book she has her period and realizes she's not pregnant immediately after Carrie dies. In fact, she has her period, and it's like a really bloody mess is how it's described, and it has the novel opening on this period scene and then ending on this period scene, which I'm sure is some kind of metaphor that Stephen King was going for. I cannot tell you what it was, though. I haven't fully tried to break that down myself anyways, but it seems like they were trying to do a spin on that in this film, and I don't think that it really needed to be done. I don't think it needed to be here. It doesn't add anything to the story, really. We could have done something differently. But yeah, after Carrie does the ultrasound, she kicks her out of the house and decides that she's not going to kill her. And we see the house crumble down into the earth. And I really do think the scene looks cool. I really enjoy the effects of it. And again, maybe it's just me blinded by nostalgia, because I just love that scene so much the first time I saw this movie. And to this day, it sticks with me. The only part of it that doesn't stick with me is all the random rocks that just fall into the house. That house wasn't made of stones or anything, so why do we have the random rocks there? Was it a callback to the hail that rains down in the novel when Carrie was a kid, and there's supposed to be rocks bursting through the roof or something? Because I know that's something they talked about doing in the original film, but they ended up not doing that. So I think it's kind of weird that they choose to have all these stones in the house, but then there's no stones raining on the house. And also, another side note to mention on that hail scene, they actually filmed it for this one, and they cut it. So far, the second remake is the only version to show that flashback to Carrie's youth of her raining all these stones down onto the house. But to get back on track, though, because my ADHD brain, man, we jump back to a little bit later after the house collapses in, and Sue is at this court hearing about everything that happened, and they're questioning her about the events of prom night. And during this sequence, we have her eventually going to Carrie's grave and leaving a rose, and written on the grave is "Carrie White burns in hell," or something along those lines. And I don't mind this ending until we get to the cheap jump scare, if that's what you can call it. I don't like it. You have this crack forming up the grave, and then all of a sudden a fist just punches the front of it, and you hear Carrie's scream, and I feel like it's implying that Carrie's a ghost. And if that was a sequel setup, I don't want to know what they wanted to do with that sequel, because as much as I like this movie, that is stupid. That is such a stupid way to end your freaking movie. And I actually prefer the unrated version of the ending. They have an alternate ending on the Blu-ray that you can choose to watch the movie with, actually, where it's more of a modern twist of the nightmare sequence from the original film. You have Sue in the middle of giving labor, and all of a sudden, all the lights start to spaz out, and this bloody hand comes out of her hoo-ha, I don't know how else to word that without being vulgar, and she starts reaching around, and she screams, and then she wakes up, and it was all a nightmare, and her mother is trying to soothe her as she's very, very pregnant. I think that's a way better ending. I enjoy it. I don't think it's perfect by all means, and I still think there's a better ending they could have came up with, but I think it's way better than the one that we got theatrically. I really do think this movie would get less hate overall if it wasn't a remake. I think if this movie existed in a vacuum, that way more people wouldn't have a problem with it, that they would even enjoy some of the things that this movie tries to do and does do, because some of the things that are done in this, I think, are done really well. but unfortunately it doesn't exist in a vacuum, and the Brian De Palma version does exist, so it does make it impossible to not compare the two projects to one another, because like I said at the beginning of this review, this film does not exist as a new adaptation of the book. It is a remake of the Brian De Palma movie. It is not anything else. And because we never saw those deleted scenes, they're not in the movie, they're not in the cut that was released to audiences, there's no other way to judge this movie other than that. That's if those scenes even exist. But even with all that in mind, I still love this movie. I hold so much nostalgia for it, and I am really glad that it does exist, and it just strengthens the love that I have for this franchise. And because this was the movie that got me into Carrie and introduced me to her, even if it was just the teaser that introduced me into this world of Kings, it's what got me into the idea of reading the Carrie novel, which was my very first Stephen King novel I ever read. And I have so much love for this franchise. I have so much love for all these characters, and forever I will defend this movie. I don't care if I lose people here. Like, I love this movie, man. Like, leave me alone. And another thing, too, that I wanted to talk about or touch on, that if you've seen my other videos, you know I can't help myself but talk about them, is the viral marketing they did for this movie, man, is so freaking cool. I found 2 different instances of it, and stuff like this makes me wish that we did things like this more often than what we do, because I feel like every now and then we get viral marketing stunts, but overall we really don't get them that often. But this movie had like 2 different ones. We had this one where they had like all these people at this like faux coffee shop, and then they had a girl with telekinesis come in and like throw a guy up against the wall and scare everybody in there because they didn't know it was actors, and it caught them off guard. I think that's really cool, and I wish that I could end up going to one of these like stunt marketing things, because I don't even know how I would react in a situation like that, because like I don't believe in people with telekinesis, but like how the fuck do you react if you saw some shit like that in front of you, man, and you didn't realize it was a stunt? Another one that I thought was pretty neat as well is they had this phone number at the end of the trailer that they told you to call, and if you called it, you'd have Carrie answering the phone, and she would be trying to be like, are you from the school, before Margaret would jump in and like pull her away from the phone. In fact, I'll just play a little clip of it right here so you can hear it, because I don't want to have to explain all that.
Are you from my school? It's just my mom catches me. Harrietta! No, Mama.
You go to your closet and pray.
No! Oh, no! Pray, little girl. Pray for forgiveness. Oh, no! Let me out! I swear to God, yes.
And God made Eve from the rib of Adam, and Eve was weak. Say it.
Don't you dare call this number again.
But yeah, no, I wish that we got stuff like that more often than what we do, and it's such a shame that we don't, honestly, man. But anyways, that wraps up my review of the 2013 Carrie remake. You guys should let me know what you thought of it, if you have similar fond feelings for this movie that I do, or if you want to hate on it, just get in the comments and continue to hate on it. Like, I'm completely cool with it, man. Like, you're not gonna make me feel bad for liking this movie. Covering Carrie the Musical. I will preface that this is going to be more of an overview and review of the series of events that led to the ultimate misfire, and if you want more of a step-by-step history to what went wrong here, I highly recommend you check out Wait in the Wings video on this, which I will be linking below. It's about an hour long, and it is extremely insightful about the very messy steps that were led to the show's eventual downfall, and then its resurgence. Anyways though, let's dive right on in. Carrie's Fateful Night at Prom is one of these stories almost everyone knows. Stephen King's debut novel was a bestseller when it dropped, and the 1976 film only cemented his place as a master of horror that much more. But the story didn't stop there. In 1988, about 12 years after the movie, Carrie's second adaptation took a strange turn that would make anyone raise an eye. This time, it wasn't on the big screen. It swung its way to the Broadway stage. Carrie the Musical became one of the biggest flops in theater history, with only 16 previews and 5 regular performances. The musical took over $8 million to produce, but was yanked from any future showings, becoming one of Broadway's biggest flops. Yet, like its title character, it wasn't gone for good. A little over 2 decades later, in 2012, the show made a surprising return and found new life, quickly gaining a devoted cult following. The musical that once could only be found on bootleg VHS tapes and online found its footing off-Broadway, with a cast recording finally being released. The musical follows the same story I've already covered in my last 3 videos, so if you've seen the remakes, you basically know what you're getting in for here. Only this time it's told through song and dance. Now, this isn't one of my all-time favorite musicals, but I do genuinely enjoy a lot of the music in this entry, and I love seeing stage musical adaptations of horror properties. They are extremely rare to come by, but the ones we do have are pretty fun. Evil Dead the Musical, American Psycho, even Little Shops of Horrors are some of my all-time favorites in that genre. Carrie fits right in with those as a surprisingly faithful and entertaining adaptation of the source material. By using stuff from both the novel and the 1976 film, adding scenes with Miss Desjardins from the Brian De Palma film are used here like 2 unsuspecting hearts, the song which covers the part where Miss Desjardins gives Carrie a pep talk after Carrie admits Tommy asked her to the prom. We also have added in from the novel the police interrogation sequence, which is used as this wraparound plot through the story as Sue recounts the events leading up to and on prom night, her being the only survivor. Most of my experience with this show comes from the stage recordings on YouTube and listening to the soundtrack. I've never actually seen it live, but it's one I'd love to. Unfortunately, productions of cult shows like this don't exactly tour through my area, so I don't see that happening anytime soon. Still, the history of this show's disastrous original run is just fascinating to me and a huge part of why I enjoy it. Just take the infamous costume fiasco. When producers asked for the costumes to look more like Grease, they meant the 1950s themed stage musical, obviously, but the designer apparently thought that they meant actual Grease and turned in sketches of the characters in togas. That kind of wild miscommunication is a small part of the show's disastrous steps, but could still sum up why the 1988 Broadway production ended up such a hot mess. The original version also had some questionable choices in the score. For example, there was a full-blown number where Chris and Billy go to the pig farm and slaughter pigs for the blood, all choreographed and set to music. Did we really need that staged as a song and dance? It honestly feels like if The Greatest Showman had stopped halfway through the show so P.T. Barnum could be shown abusing the animals. It's just one of those, what were they thinking? Why are we seeing this kind of moments? Thankfully, the 2012 off-Broadway revival cut the excess. If the show had been the version Broadway got back in 1988, the reputation of Carrie the Musical would probably be a very different story today. A lot of the songs from the revival still stick in my head, and I think they highlight just how much potential this material actually has. Some real standouts for me would be The World According to Chris, which gives more backstory and depth to Chris Hargensen, and it actually humanizes her while still showing how cruel she can be, all wrapped in this like snappy pop style anthem. Then there's Do Me a Favor, an ensemble number that's incredibly catchy. It's got Chris convincing Billy to help with the pig's blood prank while Sue is pressuring Tommy to take Carrie to prom, all playing out in this clever back and forth type structure. Easily one of my favorite songs in the whole show as well. And of course, I can't talk about this musical without mentioning And Eve Was Weak, the big duet between Carrie and her mother. In both the original and the revival, the actresses playing Margaret White were absolute vocal powerhouses. The song is rooted in Margaret's fanatical religious views, and while I'm not religious myself per se, the sheer vocal intensity and dip into Margaret's psyche make it one of the most haunting tracks from the entire score. It's chilling, emotional, and even calls to mind other religiously charged showstoppers like Hellfire from The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Both numbers capture how faith can twist into obsession, and both leave a massive impact and are standouts of their shows. Now, if you've seen my other videos, you already know we can't talk about Carrie without talking about the climactic prom scene. Every version of this story lives or dies on how it handles that moment, and in the original 1988 Broadway production, the approach was very different compared to later revivals. Instead of them dumping actual stage blood onto Carrie, they used lighting effects for the stunt. A red spotlight would shine down on her, signaling to the audience that the pig's blood had dropped, and that was it. No liquid and no stunt, just a wash of color. Some modern productions still take that route for practicality's sake, since dropping the fake blood can make a mess and cause a hazard for the actors, but others have leaned into the spectacle by actually dumping fake blood on the actress. As for my preference, if I were to see this show live, I would 100% want to see the version that has the fake blood getting dropped on her. That sounds way more entertaining to me, just like how you hear about that Evil Dead musical and they are raining all that fake blood everywhere onto the stage. Like, I want to see the sloppy mess. I want to be in a splatter zone. Like, if I'm paying for a show, I want the full experience. In the musical, Carrie unleashes her powers right there in the gym, killing Chris, Billy, and all of the classmates in the prom sequence itself. You don't get the extended sequence of Carrie leaving the prom and stumbling across Chris and Billy outside of the prom and killing them. It all happens within the gymnasium. So in other words, you don't have the infamous car attack in this entry. And honestly, how would you even stage a moving car in a Broadway theater without it looking ridiculous? What's most interesting to me, though, about this entry is that this is the only adaptation where Carrie herself essentially kills Tommy Ross. In every other version, from De Palma's film to the 2002 TV movie and the 2013 remake, Tommy dies when the bucket that drops the pig's blood accidentally swings down and cracks him in the head. Here, the show makes it clear that Carrie's telekinesis is what kills him, and it even seems implied that she suspects Tommy was part of the prank, which adds a darker edge to her breakdown. It's a bold choice and one that sets this version apart from the others. From the perspective of this being a Broadway show, I get why they tightened the scope. You can't exactly level a whole town on stage the way the novel describes, or the 2002 film attempted, by keeping everything confined to the gymnasium and having Carrie unleash her powers on all of her classmates instead of the entire city. A huge set piece at the end of the show was this staircase that was supposed to descend onto the stage during Margaret and Carrie's showdown as a homage to the Stairway to Heaven, and even that was kind of laughable, and I'm glad they cut it in the revival, because in the original you see this whole staircase just kind of descend from the screen right after the prom destruction, and it's just really confusing what's happening as you're seeing this giant white staircase descend from the ceiling, and I really don't think it accomplishes what they were trying to go for at all. And just like in the novel, Carrie stops her mother's heart with her mind, because again, how would one pull off the iconic crucifixion from the De Palma film on stage? Now, another project I feel the need to mention, and it's kind of unfortunate, If you guys saw my Heather's ranking video, you know I included this in there as well, but Riverdale did a musical episode using music from this show, and mind you, any perspective I have from Riverdale now is from that Heather's episode, and now this one, so I have no clue what's happening story-wise in this series whatsoever. The biggest thing I noticed is Madeline Pesh, who plays Cheryl. She is the lead actress in those new Strangers movies that everyone hates, and hot take, as bad as that first one was, I kind of loved how stupid it was. Like, hide the pitchforks, please. I can't even tell you if this woman has a good singing voice, because in this episode, she initially is supposed to play Carrie in the show, and the autotune they use for her is extremely cringe. In fact, a lot of the dialogue in this episode is extremely cringe as a whole.
I was wrestling with some dark, Carrie White-like demons. And I'm so sorry.
You have her trying to convince everyone she could play Carrie and that she fits the role, which is extremely laughable seeing as how popular her character is, which is something I was even able to gather just from watching 2 episodes. So it made sense when they passed it on to Midge, I suppose. On the flip side, at least in the opening scene, we have Archie working out, and if I had been a kid when this came out, he'd have been 100% my gay awakening. Overall, they kind of just Frankenstein the songs into this episode, much like they did in that previous episode I saw. And though I will admit, I think they did a better job here, I still wasn't much of a fan, and I just think this show is just extremely not made for me, and that's okay. My generation had Pretty Little Liars, and the next had Riverdale. I fully get it. So unless you're a diehard teen drama fan or an utter Carrie franchise completionist, I really don't think there's much need to watch this episode. I will give credit where credit is due though, and the actress who plays Betty does a fantastic job singing The World According to Chris, even if the choreography and the added sound effects were not really giving during the scene. I'd say I'm done with this series, but eventually I'll cover American Psycho, and by golly, of course Riverdale did an episode for that musical too, so lucky me, I guess. To cycle back to the original production though, for a Carrie story, it carries a lot of heart, no pun intended, and you can see the passion in the project, and just reading interviews with the creators, you can tell that they thought they were creating something special. Ultimately though, the production was far too big for its britches, and that's a huge part of the reason why I think the original run on Broadway flopped so massively. I don't think this is a perfect musical by any means. There are plenty of songs I didn't even talk about in this video that are skips for me that I don't find that interesting or entertaining, but overall it's still a pretty fun show. If I had the opportunity to go see it, I would 100%, if only for the extremely interesting history behind this show. If you've been following along the last few weeks, give or take, you'll know I've been covering the entire Carrie franchise, and today I'm capping it off with the Rage Carrie 2, which came out in 1999. The film follows Rachel and when her closest friend commits suicide after being manipulated by a group of popular boys for a sex for points game. Quiet and bookish Rachel decides to get back at the guilty parties. Although Rachel falls for sensitive football player Jesse, she still remains determined to punish his friends. When she discovers that she has superhuman abilities, it ups the stakes for her revenge, mirroring a supernatural incident that occurred in the town decades before. And I have to admit, I had a pretty strange experience with this one. I don't hate it by any means, but it's not my favorite in this franchise if I'm being honest, and I can't say it's all that great. There are definitely things the film did that could have been handled way better. That said, I do enjoy the continuation of the Carrie story. It's fascinating to peek back into this universe yet again, with another character struggling with telekinetic powers. Did that character really need to be Carrie's sister, though? I just don't think so. In its own weird way, too, the movie also tries to tackle a real-world issue that was pretty relevant at the time, the Spur Posse, and while it's pulled off with mixed success here, I did find the story itself interesting enough to look deeper into. And for those who don't know, the Spur Posse was a clique of former and current Lakewood High School students from Lakewood, California. The members of the group admitted to competing for points in a long-running game of sexual conquests. Accusations of sexual assault and misconduct against the group was filed by 7 different girls, and on March 18th of 1993, 9 members of the group were arrested by the Los Angeles County Sheriff Department for sex crimes, including sexual assault, lewd conduct, and statutory rape of a 10-year-old minor. When allegations against the Spur Posse came to light, members of the group were invited to talk shows, interviewed for publications, and placed on covers of magazines. They posed for Penthouse and Sassy, a teen girls magazine, which, yes, you unfortunately heard that very right, and many sentiments shared by the media, and a direct quote from one of the headlines was "Boys will be boys," which is a sentiment that was shared in the 90s by a lot of people during this case. It wasn't a big deal, apparently. And this movie clearly weaves in commentary inspired by that case. From everything I read, it blows my mind how underreported the whole situation was, and how the narrative of the boys being the victims is just, it's a gross pill to swallow, and I don't understand that time, and it sucks because I still think we live in this toxic masculinity type era where you don't really believe the victim. It kind of goes without saying, if you're a rich, white, straight guy, you're probably going to get away with whatever crime you commit, and these boys barely got a slap on the wrist. And again, I've said this in other videos, this isn't a true crime YouTube channel by any means, so I don't really have any interest on doing a deep dive into full details about the case. What I will do is I found a YouTube video that goes over it, and I will link that below, but if you're curious, look it up. It's both interesting and a very frustrating case. And those last 2 words, interesting and frustrating, really sum up this movie for me. There are some golden ideas in here for a Carrie sequel, but overall the film just doesn't work thanks to some of the direction and story choices. For one, this sequel never had much of a leg to stand on. It came out over 23 years after the original Carrie, which is a weird time gap to suddenly drop a follow-up. And then to add right on top, to make things even messier, the script wasn't written as a Carrie sequel in the first place. Yes, it had the telekinesis angle, but MGM noticed how similar it felt to Carrie and decided to rework the shelved script into a sequel, making Rachel Carrie's long-lost sister, and we discover that Rachel's mother had also slept with Carrie's father, Ralph White, who carries the TK gene, thus explaining why Rachel has the same telekinetic abilities as her late sister. The little talked about family drama of this franchise is extremely funny to me because Ralph is never seen on screen in either film, but is seriously the biggest fuckboy that caused so much of the catastrophes in this franchise, but I digress. In this entry, we have the return of Sue Snell, with Amy Irving reprising her role from the original film, becoming a sequel legacy character before that term had ever been coined. It's obvious that her character was the only one that was going to return for this sequel, since she was the only survivor of the prom night massacre. But when getting casted for the film, Amy Irving asked for Brian De Palma's blessing, which he did give because both her and De Palma liked the original director of the project. But then, plot twist, the director was fired and they hired on a new one. And that story changed entirely. In a very recent interview from 2024, she said, "I'm sorry I ever made that film, except they paid me a shitload of money," which, fair, I'll never diss someone for admitting to taking that paycheck. And I don't hate Sue's inclusion in this film. In fact, I like her overall arc in it. Since the Prom Night Massacre and her involvement in the abuse of Carrie White, she has become a guidance counselor trying to make up for the guilt of what she did. She notices Rachel's early on signs of having the same abilities and tries to help her take control over her telekinetic powers, even taking her to the location of the original prom massacre and showing her what was left of the school gymnasium all these years later. And I enjoy all these bits, even that scene where they go to the original gymnasium. I think that's a really fun inclusion, even if it's kind of strange they didn't just tear what was left of it down. Even Roger Ebert commented on that in his review about how weird of a choice that is, but unlike him, I did enjoy seeing that, and I thought it was a really fun little thing to just sprinkle in the movie. I really do enjoy all these parts where they call back to the original film, but where I cannot say I enjoy it is all the weird cuts of Sue having flashbacks to the original movie. They are extremely jarring and super clunky with this strange red tint over them, and it makes those scenes look tacky when they didn't look that way in the original film. I mean, they were filmed by De Palma, need I say more, and they just made them look bad in this entry with the way that they were used here as these like weird like flashbacks for Sue's trauma. It just wasn't a part of it that I liked. That's not the only part of the movie that has weird editing. There are a lot of strange editing choices in this, because throughout the film, when Rachel is overcome by her blossoming powers, the screen starts to warp and becomes black and white. It's incredibly tacky looking, it's not a good effect, and overall, the scope of the film, I think there's way too much going on, so none of the characters feel all that fleshed out to me and are extremely surface level, which is a huge problem when the horror of your film is in the last 30 minutes. Give me something to be able to latch onto for that first 60, otherwise I'm just going to be checked out of your damn movie. I mean, just in this movie alone, you have Sue's trauma that I talked about, Rachel's conflict with her overly religious, insane mother, and her shitty foster parents to boot. Then we have the jocks who are playing the Fuck Girls for Points game, where they photograph and videotape the girls they sleep with. But one of the jocks is just such a good guy and actually likes Rachel, so obviously Jesse and Rachel fall in love with each other, and I could keep raising fingers on my hand because there is so many other little plot lines to this, but I digress on that. It's just a lot to follow in one movie, and I wish we'd had more focus on all these characters and gave them moments to truly shine, because that's why the original worked so well. There's a huge cast of characters in that original film, and if you watched my other videos in this series, you've heard me gush about them throughout each entry. The difference is those characters actually had stellar moments to stand out, whereas these ones feel like they're fighting for screen time amongst each other. Although, I'll admit and give credit where credit is due, many of the callbacks in this film do feel well written and in place, especially after discovering this was originally a different film entirely rather than a Carrie sequel. It doesn't really feel like anything was just forced into the script, because I've seen many movies that forced their way into a franchise and it just did not work whatsoever. Hellraiser. This one does add in the whole Sue storyline, Rachel's father being Ralph, and then random silly little callbacks in the dialogue. Like, there's one scene that feels eerily similar to the pervy gym coach in the second Nightmare on Elm Street, with all the homoerotic subtext in tow, because in this entry, the gym teacher forces one of the football players to drop his pants in class and drops this golden line to his butt cheeks.
I just wanted to check to see if maybe you had a tampon string hanging between your legs.
Now, look me in the eye and tell me that wasn't a callback. A very strange one, but a callback nonetheless. The main thing that needs talked about, and it's what we come to these films for, is the final act when we see the rage and revenge get taken out on our group of douchebag bullies, and I'd say this one delivers even if some of the deaths feel extremely of the time. I'm looking at you, girl, getting filleted by a bunch of CDs, which admittedly a pretty awesome kill still, nonetheless. But in our final act, the jocks and popular girls get together and invite Rachel to a rager at one of their homes. What Rachel doesn't know is a couple nights earlier, when she was on a romantic date with Jesse and the two do the deed, his friends had hidden a camera and filmed the whole thing. They show this footage at the party to humiliate her and convince her that Jesse only slept with her to get some more points in their game. This obviously triggers her telekinesis as she finally comes undone on these asshats. It's very B-movie, but the whole scene is extremely fun with only a few minor critiques from my end of things. We see a tattoo Rachel has of a thorn-covered heart stretching across her arm and around her body, and why does this happen, you may ask? Because it looks cool. Do they need any other reason? Because that's about the only reason that we get. But as Rachel inflicts this massacre, you have this really cool effect of the windows bursting behind Rachel that kills many of the partygoers. You also have a scene of her shattering this girl's glasses directly into her eyes, which causes that girl to shoot a harpoon gun into a guy's junk, effectively castrating him. The kills are mostly on point this entire sequence. The only one I have complaint about is how they finish off Sue in this. Her kill does look admittedly cool, but it's super lackluster for how quick it is. She rushes to the house to try and save Rachel. A fire poker is sent sailing through the door and impales her. For a kill, it's fun and the effects are pretty damn good, but that is not how you should kill off a legacy character, and I shouldn't be the one to have to say that, especially when that's the only one you have from your previous movie. It was extremely forced and unearned, and I have no problem bringing back characters from previous entries of the franchise and killing them. Yes, it sucks to see characters I like die, but if you can do it in a good way that works as a good send-off, then I'm all for it. This is horror after all. No one should be safe, otherwise where are the stakes? I just think this death could have been way more impactful, and they should have gone back to the writing board for a truly good kill for her that was actually memorable. And I've spent more time bitching about this death than they actually did showing it in the film. At the end of the scene, Jesse comes to save Rachel and sees the damage she has caused. Initially, Rachel thinks he was in on recording their moment together, but before she can kill him, the videotape of their first time is still playing in the background, and she hears Jesse say in the video, "I love you," while she was sleeping, and how sweet. Too bad I didn't really care much about their relationship this whole movie. After she discovers that Jesse had true feelings for her, a part of the ceiling comes crashing down, and she manages to throw Jesse out of the way, saving him but crushing her and leaving her to burn to death in the rubble of the mansion. Then, of course, because this is a horror movie, of course we need one last jump scare, and we see Jesse a year later going to university. He has a picture of Rachel on the mirror and has adopted her dog, which, side note, by the way, I have such a soft spot for basset hounds, and this dog is so damn cute the whole movie, and honestly, it's just such a good boy, so just remember that. Good dog actor in this film. But as Jesse's doing schoolwork, Rachel appears and the two share no words before jumping into a kiss when, oh no, Rachel shatters to pieces in one of the worst CGI effects, and we discover it was all just a bad dream. And as much as I love this genre, which obviously I think it goes without saying, I've revolved my entire channel around it, I hate when they force in these cheap jump scares that aren't even scary, especially with effects that bad. I genuinely want to know who actually gets scared by these terribly written endings. Like, I'm waiting, like, I'll list a number on the screen. Call that number if this scared you, I suppose. But alas, the Rage Carrie 2 roughly made $17 million in the box office on a budget of $21 million, which isn't a surprise to me that this movie flopped so hard because, again, this sequel came out 23 years later, and I genuinely don't believe anyone was aching for a follow-up to De Palma's film. I genuinely don't hate this movie. There was moments I liked, but overall, I just felt bored by the lackluster characters, which I've already explained ad nauseum. I need to be entertained by the characters in your cast if it's going to be so big, and if you're not giving me the horror until the final act, then the characters really do need to work. Otherwise, what is the audience here for if your characters aren't good and that's what you're having to watch is this character drama for the grand majority of your movie? Anyways, though, that's going to wrap up my thoughts on The Rage Carrie 2 and caps off my coverage on this franchise. You should let me know if it was a film you enjoyed or disliked in the comments right down below. And this might be my last entry in this series of videos for now, but for future Carrie news, there is currently a Mike Flanagan television series in production for Carrie that'll be streaming on Prime, which I imagine will come out sometime next year, give or take, and I'd be lying if I said I wasn't excited to see it, so I can tell y'all without a doubt that when that comes out, I'll be sure to cover it for you guys. Now we're flashing back to the present, and we've survived every prom night this franchise had to throw at us, including a house party as well. So now I'm going to rank all 6 versions of this franchise. So without further ado, let's spill some blood and figure out where they land on my list. And remember, my list is my list, and it's not the right one, and if you'd like to tell me your ranking in the comments below, you should go ahead and do that, because I can already tell you, I have opinions that people are not going to like, and that is completely okay. But coming in at last place, and probably unsurprisingly, is Carrie 2002. This film is essentially a direct recreation of the novel, and hearing that, you would think that it would mean that it would be a stellar film, but no. The made-for-TV budget glares through every single scene with less than mediocre camera work throughout, which is truly upsetting since the 1976 version exists, so it's impossible not to compare how ugly this one looks compared to that one. It is awesome that they tried to show the rage upon the town like in the novel, but again, with a budget so low, they should have just stuck to her rage only coming out during the prom scene in her mother's house, because the CGI is the most laughable when you see Carrie storming through those streets and you're seeing all these different cars getting thrown around. It doesn't help either that this movie is extremely bloated as well, coming in at almost 2 hours, and I can promise you they could have cut many scenes on the editing room floor. I will give them credit though to Angela Bettis, and even though I highly don't believe she was able to pull off looking like a believable high schooler, she does do a good job with the role and does embody Carrie White very well. Her performance though, good or not, it isn't able to save this otherwise mess of a film for me, and that's why it lands on the bottom of this list. But coming in at 5th place, and perhaps controversially, I guess we'll see, because genuinely I have no clue what people's consensus on it is, but it would be The Rage Carrie 2, and the main reason this film lands in 5th rather than 6th is because when you're watching through this franchise, it is a breath of fresh air, admittedly, seeing as out of the 5 other versions, it isn't either the novel or the 4 other stories that try to cover the novel. So it really wasn't a very hard bar to reach when all the other iterations are the same story. Even with that in mind though, this isn't my favorite movie because in these stories, the horror is only in your last 30 minutes, give or take, and you really do need to like your characters, or at least be entertained by them for the first 2/3 of your film, and this film does not accomplish that. I even think our central character, Rachel, is a poor imitation to Carrie, but I will give credit where it's due and admit that even though I'm not a fan of the character Rachel, Emily Bergel does a great job with what she was giving, so it's not to blame the actress by any means. I also enjoy Sue Snell's return in this story and seeing how the events of the first film have affected her in the present, but the way they wrap her story up is laughable at best. If you're going to bring back a legacy character, you really do need to find a good way to kill them off if you choose to kill them in a later sequel. Otherwise, why bring them back? It is just a waste to do that. I know overall I'm sounding really negative, and I swear I don't hate this movie, but I genuinely don't think we were asking for a Carrie sequel, nor was this the way to do it. Now coming in 4th place is Carrie the Musical, and my positivity will start to shine through more here because besides the bumpy ride this production went through, it is an extremely fun show. Many of the songs are extremely catchy, and the story lends itself to a musical surprisingly well, but where it lacks for me is the overall destruction at the end. It is not exactly up to the standard I would like it to be, and I fully get that you can only do so much with a stage show. It doesn't take away from the fact, though, that I've seen this story, though, multiple times now on the big screen and have been able to enjoy how chaotic everything is. And then watching a more watered-down version just feels extremely lackluster when you stack it up to the other entries. A major component of what I love about this show, though, is Margaret. Her God-fearing, Bible-thumping ways lead to some true showstoppers that are standout moments in the show and even outshines the musical itself at times. But coming in at 3rd place, and I know 100% controversially, it is not a question here, it is the book that started it all, Stephen King's Carrie. And even being his first published novel, you can see through and through why he blew up so fast and became known as a master of horror. It was truly unique storytelling, switching from scenes leading to the prom night massacre in your typical storytelling method, but the inclusion of police interviews, books written about the incident after the fact, and all the paper clippings referenced throughout the whole novel and shown to you in snippets is truly amazing world building to me, and is such a unique edge for the story that I haven't really seen any other books do before. The only thing I can't say I'm the biggest fan of is how Carrie is overall treated in the novel. A lot of the story feels more centralized around the characters inflicting the abuse upon her rather than having her as more of a focal point. This isn't a problem throughout the entire novel, and I think it does get remedied towards the end, but the beginning build-up, it feels like things just fall into place too quickly. Carrie accepting Tommy's proposal feels rushed, or even Chris's plan for dropping the pig's blood felt half-baked since she didn't even switch out the ballots. Her and Billy were essentially just hoping the dominoes were going to fall according to plan and Carrie would be crowned prom queen, so it just feels less calculated and it makes the story feel more messy and muddled. What I do love, though, is Carrie destroying the entire town, and it is something we haven't seen properly covered in any entry, and I do hope when they inevitably remake the story again, and maybe we'll even see this in Mike Flanagan's upcoming series, that they will finally create this sequence and give it the proper screen treatment that it deserves. But before I make this video any longer, I'll wrap this up and say that I do stand by the Brian De Palma film did a phenomenal job improving upon the story, and that's why this book ranks so much lower on the list. Now, coming in 2nd place is Carrie 2013, and I know most people don't like this film, but I guess I just always have to be different on this channel, and I also need to remind you guys that nostalgia is a hell of a fucking thing, but Overall, I don't consider this film much of a horror movie, but rather a tragedy. For the grand majority of its runtime anyways, you don't see the overall horror until that prom sequence, other than the little tidbits of Margaret self-harming herself, and for some reason, to me anyways, that makes this tale, known so well, feel more heartbreaking. And though Chloe Grace Moretz doesn't look like your Carrie type to most people, I do think she's a terrific actress and did a fantastic job with the role and deserves more praise than what she gets for it. The acting through the film, actually, I found to be great overall, and the special effects of many of the deaths in that final sequence lean downright towards gruesome, and quite frankly, I feel like Chris finally got the death she deserved in this entire franchise, and it stands amongst the other two iterations at the best, at least in that moment anyways. Where this film does lack though for me is, at the end of the day, it is a clear remake of the original Brian De Palma film, and has very little extra inclusions from the novel. I mean, yes, there are rumors that a different cut exists, but without seeing it, there's no other way to describe this movie other than that, and we can only judge it by the cut we did get in theaters, and that's why it lands here at second. But coming in at first place, and obviously to no surprise to anyone, is Brian De Palma's 1976 film, Carrie. One of the biggest standouts of this film is the more than on-point casting of Sissy Spacek as Carrie. Though her appearance is pretty in its own unique way, and her frail figure may heavily differ from the novel, she fully embodies the character and is how everyone imagines Carrie to look like. Again, there's a reason why this woman was nominated for a damn Oscar, because of this movie. Not only that, De Palma showed masterclass filmmaking with the memorable split shots and of course the phenomenal one take during the prom sequence. He also improved the story in so many ways by having Carrie's rage turn into a delusion as she imagines even the people who cared for her are also laughing at her, and her eventually even killing them. It makes this story all the more tragic. Not only that, but he adds more scenes that make the story and characters feel more fleshed out and real, and hands down, his version of the gym teacher who helps Carrie is what made me love that character so much in the first place. It is a next to perfect movie, and that is why it lands solidly in first place. But anyways, that's gonna wrap up my coverage on the Carrie franchise, and here soon I'm going to be covering the Nightmare on Elm Street films due to a poll I did a little while back now. So if you guys want to see that or any other future videos, you should click that subscribe button. I would love to have you on the channel. I cover everything and anything horror around here. But anyways, with that all out of the way, this has been Justice, and I really hope to catch you guys on the next one. Take care.